Welcome back to Harvard. The Republican presidential field has moved even further to the right following Rick Perry's decision to support a ban on abortion, even in the cases of rape and incest. That brings to 4 now a majority of the candidates, the number of Republican presidential candidates who want abortion banned in all cases, outlawed. Rick Santorum, Newt Gingrich, Michelle Bachmann, and Rick Perry. Going further, they have all signed a pledge now to support the personhood movement, which defines a fertilized egg as a human being. To give you an idea of how extreme this position is, a ballot initiative in Mississippi supporting personhood was handily defeated in that Republican red state. While this extreme position may clearly appeal to the evangelicals in Iowa, is it pulling the party too far to the right politically? And how would it affect the way women generally vote, Republican women included, in November? Joan Walsh is editor-at-large at Salon.com. Michelle Goldberg reports from Newsweek and the Daily Beast. Joan, it's great to talk to you. Happy New Year and Merry Christmas. I haven't talked to you in a while. It just seems to me that we're getting into territory here which people ought to start thinking about. If you define a fertilized human egg as a person, perhaps even as a citizen for all I know, at that point it becomes technically, in fact, really a murder. A murder, you're killing a person if you in any way interfere with the attachment of that fertilized egg to a uterine wall. In other words, an IUD is a murdering instrument. I mean, it really gets completely far out here in what people are actually trying to put into statute. Do you think people know what they're doing here, even politically know what they're doing?
I think they do. I think they're trying to get through this primary, and some of them may well believe it. But, you know, Chris, you made the point. When you're too extreme, you're too far right for the state of Mississippi, one of our reddest states, you know you've gone too far. And, you know, you're getting to a point in the Republican Party where a female has more rights before she's born than afterwards, because this is turning the clock back even on birth control. And I think we've seen signs of this. You know, the Tea Party came into the House and they said they were all about jobs, but they spent more time trying to defund Planned Parenthood, which is about birth control as well as female cancer screenings, than they did trying to do anything about our jobs crisis. So this is a trend in the Republican Party. We've seen it for a long time, but it really has got to an extreme.
And the question here of metaphysics, you're talking about declaring under law, not religion, but under law, a fertilized egg, a person. In other words, a woman, as part of her natural reproductive cycle, some of these fertilized eggs, a lot of them perhaps, don't attach to the wall. Are they all people, too, for political purposes?
Right. I mean,
what are we talking about here?
If a fertilized egg is a human being, then basically every woman's uterus is a kind of a slaughterhouse, because, you know, fertilized eggs fail to attach in at least half of the cases. Sometimes
that's why people don't get pregnant every time they have sex, obviously.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So it's, you know, the reason that this went down in Mississippi was because beyond just banning all abortion, even when a woman's life is at stake, even in cases of rape and incest, it would have also banned the IUD. It would have interfered with IVF. I mean, this is a huge interference.
Why are they going further than simply going to... First of all, they never want to officially criminalize abortion, because then they have to actually attach some kind of statutory sanction to a woman. Like if you have an abortion, you must pay $5 or go to jail for 5 years. They don't want to ever actually do that.
Well,
but in this case, you will get to that point.
Well, part of it, that's something they don't want to talk about. I mean, a lot of Americans are uncomfortable with abortion. And because of Roe versus Wade, we've kind of been able to take for granted living in a world without back alley abortions, without women dying by the hundreds in hospital emergency rooms. So nobody wants to talk about the consequences of an abortion ban. Nobody wants to talk about arresting women and putting women in jail. That's already starting to happen around the margins. There's been a number of cases where women in really desperate circumstances have tried to end their own pregnancies and have been arrested and prosecuted.
Oh, really?
That's happening now because these restrictions are finally starting to really take effect. But that's not something that the Republican Party wants to talk about. So they talk about, like you said, these kind of metaphysical issues of when life begins. But the end result is going to be an unprecedented interference into women's lives.
I personally think we should talk about metaphysical issues. We just shouldn't make them matters of law and politics. Here's a distinct gender gap, by the way, in party identification. 53% of men and 47% of women self-identify as Republicans, but 45% of men and 53% of women self-identify as Democrats. That's no surprise, Joan, and I don't want to simplify anything about people's voting habits. Obviously, people vote out of a cluster of concerns, including rights, human rights, women's rights, but also education, health care issues, war and peace, taxes. People vote on a lot of things. But this gender gap, what do you think it's joined? What will this do perhaps to enlarge the gender gap if the Republicans go too far here?
I think it will enlarge the gender gap. You know, we really didn't see very much of a gender gap, a difference between men and women voting, Chris, until 1980 and Ronald Reagan. And even though women did ultimately wind up supporting Ronald Reagan, they didn't support him as wholeheartedly as men did. And people at the time said it was a cluster of things. It was the role of the Christian right, but it was also, in polls, women tend to be much more supportive of the social safety net. Women want programs for the poor. They want programs for the elderly. They are the more economically vulnerable gender. And so sometimes it's a matter of these things coming home to them. They're the ones taking care of elderly relatives usually.
Exactly.
So they were also afraid of Reagan's bellicosity. And so you've seen a gender gap widen, basically, since Ronald Reagan, and really open up with Barack Obama and John McCain. So this is something that the Democrats have been able to count on. They were worried that white women went back to the Republicans in 2010, but the trends are looking good for them to come back to the Democrats in 2012.
We'll have more time to talk about this later. Thanks for coming on, Michelle. Michelle Holberg, thank you. Happy New Year. Thank you, Joan, my good friend.